Hello, everyone. Welcome to another study of Oahspe.com podcast video, copyright for YouTube. Today's subject is recession, protest, pandemic cycle. And on the study of Oahspe.com page called Cycles, Predictions, Earth Events, AGI, at the top it says, there is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. That's from Ecclesiastes 3:1 of the Bible. And underneath that, there is an image of plate 32 from the 1882 Oahspe edition, and it says the earth in Aji. And to the right of that, there is plate 94 of the 1882 Oahspe edition, and it says Ark of Cosmon, Earth in Danha. Aji is a cold, nebulous substance in outer space that the Earth periodically passes through. Dan is a light region in outer space that the Earth periodically passes through. Aji stimulates man's physical attributes and desires. Dan stimulates man's spiritual attributes and desires. And scrolling down the web page till we get to about halfway down. It says right there, surface temperature anomalies, global mean. Above chart shows many subcycles of Dan and Aji. Red equals Dan, warm. Blue equals Aji, cold. Oahspe's The Lord's Fifth Book, Chapter 1, Verse 5. Blue, which is the coldest color, and red, which is the warmest color. And it says below that, 2013, 1988, 1947, 1881, and 1848 are high or peak points in the 11-year sunspot cycles, equals 33-year cycle. High Dan times. First rule of prophecy. 1914 is a low point in sunspot cycle, equals 66-year Aji or beast, World War I. Sunspot cycles. And underneath that is a link that I'll click on. The link says Sunspots 2013 cycles from 1850. And there it is. and showing you the 33-year high up spike cycles. Right there, 1850 correlates with the 1848 high point in the sunspot cycle. 33 years later, 1881, another high point in the sunspot cycle. 33 years later would be 1914, but that's a low point because that's the 66 year. And as you see right there, 1914 is the low point in the sunspot cycle, or Oahspe. Another 33 years is 1947, and that's a high point right there in the sunspot cycle. Another 33 years is 1980, again another high point in the sunspot cycle. And then 2013 is at the end of the chart right there, and it's going up to another high point in 2013, 2014 in the sunspot cycle. Clicking back. And it says underneath that, Oahspe's God's Book of Ben, chapter 9, verse 12. Oh, that the prophets would apply my lessons of the past in order to foretell the future. Oh, that the prophets would apply my lessons of the past in order to foretell the future. Cyclic rhythmic major cold down spikes since start of Cosmon. And I charted these since 1848. The major down spike of Cosmon from 1848 to present. 1849 was the first one, and it says there equals poltergeist cases hit in an interesting peak in 1849. Number 2 was 1855. Number 3 was 1857. Equals stock market panic of 1857. 1861 was the fourth one. Equals United States Civil War. Defeat of the Papal Army by Victor Emmanuel and Garibaldi. And I won't go through every one of them, but just the ones that have something written next to them of these major down spike cycles. 1873 was the next one. That was the seventh one. Equals stock market panic of 1873. May 9th, 1873. 1893 was the 11th major down spike cycle. Equals stock market panic of 1893. 1907 was the 14th. Equals stock market panic of 1907. 1917 equals 15th. Equals 1918 flu pandemic beginning in Austria in the spring of 1917. Russian Revolution, rise of the Soviet Union. 1929 is the 17th. Equals stock market crash, Great Depression. 2008 is the 41st. Equals Great Recession, stock market crash. Most earthquakes worldwide, 31,777 from 2000 to 2012. List of epidemics. 1929, 1930 pandemic worldwide. Piscistococcus. Clicking on that link brings you to the Wikipedia page. Psittacosis, and then scrolling down. Psittacosis, also known as parrot fever and ornithosis, is a zoonotic infectious disease in humans caused by a bacterium called Chlamydia psittacasi, and contracted from infected parrots such as macaws, cockatiels, and budgerigars, and from pigeons, sparrows, ducks, hens, gulls, and many other species of birds. The incidence of infection in canaries and finches is believed to be lower than in psittacine birds. Psittacine birds. In certain contexts, the word is used when the disease is carried by any species of birds belonging to the family Psittacidae, whereas ornithosis is used when other birds carry the disease. Signs and symptoms in humans. The symptoms of the disease range from an apparent illness to systematic illness with severe pneumonia. It presents chiefly as an atypical pneumonia. In the first week, the symptoms mimic typhoid fever, prostrating high fevers, joint pains, diarrhea, conjunctivitis, nosebleeds, and lower level of white blood cells, and so on and so forth. If you want to read more, you can go to the website and click on the link. And going back, so that was the 1929-1930 pandemic worldwide, psittacosis. 284,000 plus, medium estimate by CDC. Worldwide, 2009, 2010, 2009 flu pandemic, informally called swine flu, pandemic H1N1/09 virus. Then we come to COVID-19 pandemic, 2019 to present, worldwide, 1 million plus as of 10 October 2020. And clicking on the link, wikipedia.org, list of epidemics. There it is, list of epidemics, Wikipedia. This is a list of the largest known epidemics, including pandemics caused by an infectious disease. Widespread non-communicable diseases such as cardiovascular disease and cancer are not included. An epidemic is the rapid spread of disease to a large number of people in a given population within a short period of time. And scrolling down, there's the list. And we're going to scroll down to the 20th century. There it is in the 20th. 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 So right there, 1918, 1920. 1918 influenza pandemic, Spanish flu, worldwide. Influenza A virus subtype H1N1. And there is an image of it right there, of the H1N1 virus. And in this category right here, I believe is number of deaths. 50 million plus, 17 to 100 million. 3 to 5% world's population. And in 1929 to 1930, there was the psittacosis pandemic worldwide. Psittacosis, 100 plus were the numbers of death. And so on and so forth. If you want to look at this more, you can go to the website and click on the link. Going back. So the 2009, 2010 swine flu H1N1, there was 284,000 plus. That would have been the number of deaths. So scrolling down, on page 39 of Time of the Quickening, published 2011 by Susan B. Martinez, PhD. In both Egypt and Mesoamerica, that's in Africa and Central America, mathematician and seer alike stood as equals in the prophecy enterprise. One was trained to analyze data and apply the prophetic numbers. Analyze data and apply the prophetic numbers equals cycles of Agi, cold years, prophetic numbers, 11-year solar magnetic sunspot cycle. Oahspe, Book of Safa, chapter Osiris, verse 56. Agi, semi-dark. There are places in the firmament of heaven. Argi, when the earth passes through Agi, it aggregateth and groweth. An abundance of Dargi, which is another word for Argi or Agi, in the firmament, giveth a cold year upon the earth. In the years of Arjan, mortals become warriors. Save your prophets understand, Agi, they cannot tell what the next year will be. Scrolling down. From Oahspe 101, date 1/19/2015, I was asked the question, what is your take on this next 33 years, 2014 to 2048? And my answer, January 20th, 2015, the next low point in the geomagnetic cycle will be 2019-2020. This should be similar to 2008 low point. 2019-2020 should be increased chance of economic depression, recession, stock market crash, earthquakes, etc. Now, the one thing I left out of that was the epidemics. I looked over it didn't unite the epidemic cycles with this cycle, but I'm doing that now. And then underneath that, next low point in solar sunspot cycle are 2019, 2020, and 2030, 2031. And that's what I wrote in 2015. And clicking on the link, which says image prediction solar cycle, right there. So in 2015, The next solar cycle is presented here on this chart. And it says you are here, which was 2015 at the time that this was posted and written. So the next low point was right there, 2019, 2020, which we're currently in right now. And then the cycle rises, and then it hits another low point in the future right there, which looks to be 2031 and possibly into 2032. Yeah, from 2031 going into 2032. And these are solar cycles, sunspot cycles. And they correlate with what I call the cold down spikes, which correlates to Aji, as Oahspe says. An abundance of Aji in the firmament when the earth passes through it brings a cold year to the earth. This is the science of cycles, which is one of many things that you'll learn in reading the great book Oahspe. And some of this information is in the book of Safa. Going back, right there, once again, the book of Safa containing scientific, factual information, and in this case relating to cycles and to Aji, which is important when it comes to understanding prophecy and what will happen. It says right there, which I've read before. Now, continuing from where I left off, I use the 11-year solar sunspot cycle along with the climate cycles of heat and cold for prophecy and calculating Aji and Dan cycles. Oahspe Book of the Ark of Bond, chapter XIV, which I believe is chapter 14, verse 4. To events of prophecy, there was also another calendar called the Ode, signifying sky time or heavenly times. One ode was equivalent to 11 long years. Oahspe, the Lord's fifth book, chapter 2, verse 15. Learn to prophesy by the sun. In brackets, I put solar sunspot cycles. Worldwide 2019 to present, 2019 to 20 coronavirus pandemic, coronavirus disease. April 22nd, 2020. Will the worst downturn since the Great Depression last long? Clicking on that link. Right there, it takes you to VOX. And it says, will the worst downturn since the Great Depression last long? There's no guarantee of a rapid recovery. Weeks of record job losses have left the United States with an unemployment rate that is widely estimated to be higher than at any time since the Great Depression. That shocking reality naturally invites analogies and raises what is perhaps the most important economic question of our time. How long will the bad times last? That reminds me of a song by Sila Shalom. After all, what made the Great Depression so great was not just the severity of the slump, but its extraordinary length, beginning in the United States in the second half of 2029 and not really ending until almost 10 years later. So going back, the 2019-2020 Iraqi protests, also called the October Revolution in Arabic, right there, are an ongoing series of protests that consisted of demonstrations, marches, sit ins, and civil disobedience. Does that sound familiar? Clicking on the link wikipedia.org, Iraqi protests, takes you to the Wikipedia page, 2019-20 Iraqi protests. It says right here, they started on 1 October 2019, a date which was set by civil activists on social media spreading over the central and southern provinces of Iraq to protest corruption, unemployment, and an inefficient public services. The protests then escalated into full-scale calls to overthrow the administration. The Iraqi government has used live bullets, marksmen, hot water, hot pepper gas, and tear gas against protesters, leading to many deaths and injuries. Does any of this sound familiar? So clicking back. Now that was Iraq and protests. The 2019-2020 Lebanese protests, also called locally as the October Revolution, are a series of civil protests taking place in Lebanon, initially triggered by, and I'm going to click on the wikipedia.org, Lebanese protests. It says these national protests were triggered by planned taxes on gasoline, tobacco, and voice over internet protocol calls on applications such as WhatsApp, but quickly expanding into a countrywide condemnation of sectarian rule, stagnant economy, unemployment that reached 46% in 2018, endemic corruption in the public sector, legislation that is perceived to shield the ruling class from accountability, such as banking secrecy, and failures of the government to provide basic services such as electricity, water, and sanitation. The protests first erupted on 17 October 2019. It has been 360 days since they started and is still ongoing as of the time that I posted this info on studyofoahspe.com. And look at the crowds there in this Lebanese revolution or protests. Does any of that look familiar? It says protesters outside of Ra'ad al Solhi Square, Solhi Square in Beirut on 19 October 2019. So clicking back, now that was in Lebanon. America convulses amid a week of protests, but can it change? June 6, 2020. What I think is different in 2020 is a lot of the youth are participating, he said. This is the start of a revolution. That's from the Washington Post. And clicking on that link, 2020 Washington Post. America convulses amid a week of protests, but can it change? The events of recent days suggest something profound has happened, though it may be years before the country knows whether it has moved closer to the ideal of equality. And there are some images right there. A demonstration in Washington on June 1st decried police brutality. June 6, 2020. All week, the images of an American reckoning accumulated. Peaceful demonstrators calling for racial justice, phalanxes of riot police poised for clashes, urban centers aflame with scattered violence, a moat of metal erected around the White House, a president demanding military suppression of an angry mob before before theatrically brandishing a Bible. The scenes laid bare the struggle for unity against deepening division in America, 2020. By week's end, the unfolding events, at times uplifting, at times shocking, crystallized around one overriding issue. What kind of country are we? And what kind of country do we want to be? The knee on the neck became as real as it has long been symbolic. The viral image of George Floyd gasping for breath, a policeman atop his limp body, fused with the historic metaphor that for 400 years has described the violence and racism aimed at black Americans, the original sin of a great nation. Clicking back. Now we had our protests in Iraq, in Lebanon, in America. The George Floyd 2020 protest is at the early stage of becoming a global revolution or a powerful but fleeting moment in history. We do not know which. And clicking on the link from medium.com says the George Floyd protest is a revolution, not a riot. It says here, revolutions come and go. Thank you, dear Lord. All revolutions fire up, simmer, and cool down. Only then do we know if it's the real thing. And there's an image from Kenosha, WI. And clicking back. And I wrote here, there is a pattern of an approximate 11-year cycle, vertical lines and blue circles, of stock market crash, panic, Great Recession, depression, revolution, protests, pandemics from 1907, 1917, 1918, 1929, 2008, 2009, 2019, 2020. The next 11-year cycle is due to hit in 2031, 2032. See chart image link below. So clicking on the link, and this is the chart I put together right here. Climate cycles 1907, 1929, blue circles, vertical lines 2008, 2020, solar cycles. So right here you have from NASA, Goddard Space Flight Center, worldwide historical temperature 1900 to 1950. And over here you have the solar cycle from 2008 all the way to 2031. And in the middle here is showing the 2008 down spike. So these vertical lines right here show you the approximate 11-year cycles that correspond to the information that I previously read to you, like in 1907. As you can see right there, it was a down spike, the bottom of a down spike, and much below normal cold. That's the sign of Aji, as it says in the book of Safa. There's that scientific information which validates the information in Oahspe, book of Safa. And here's another vertical line of 19, what does that look like? 1918, 1917, 1918. And that corresponded with the, I think the 1907 was a stock market crash. In 1918, 1917 was the flu pandemic. Perhaps another stock market crash. But I have that information on my website, so I don't have to try to remember or speculate. It's all written there on the website. But whichever it was, this correlates with that information of recessions, pandemics, and so on and so forth, and revolutions. Yeah, 1917 was also the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia that led to the forming of the Soviet Union. So the next vertical line looks like 1929. As you can see, just like in 1917, 18, that was a much below normal cold down spike. 1929 was a cold down spike. And of course, that was the year of the Great Depression. And again, much below normal cold, much below normal cold, a sign of Aji. The global temperature of the earth dropping sharply and dramatically. And so we can see that 11-year cycle right there with these vertical lines, and then I circle the down spikes. And right here, 2008, another down spike, and that was the year of the recession, the 2008 recession, and also the 2008-2009 recession and the H1N1 pandemic. And there was a pandemic, as I previously read, in 1929. And there probably were protests back then also. So now we go forward from the 2008-2009 low point in the solar cycle. The next one is the one we're in right now, 2019-2020, which was, which is, because it's currently, not was, the pandemic of the COVID-19 and protests. And you can see there that the next low point will be there, 2031, 2032. So you can see there's a cycle to this, matching the 11-year cycle as mentioned in Oahspe, and the cold downspike, the cold year that the book of Safa describes about Aji. This is scientific fact, historical fact. I don't think this has anything to do with Bill Gates and some conspiracy. This has to do with cycles, solar cycles, cosmic cycles that the earth passes through periodically. Going back, I'm going to click on that link again and go back to it. Let you get another look at it. I scrolled it further up on the screen so that you might get a better look at it. But of course, you can visit studyofoahspe.com and click on the link and see it yourself anytime you want to. Now going back. Now there's more images and charts of the solar cycle variations. And right below that, it says prediction, prophecy, prophetic numbers, times, solar subgalactic cycles, 11-year solar vortex subgalactic radiation, heat cycle, and geomagnetic radiation cycles. And then again, I write, I use the 11-year solar sunspot cycle along with the climate cycles of heat and cold for prophecy. Two events of prophecy, there was also another calendar called the Ode, signifying sky time or heavenly times. One Ode was equivalent to 11 long years. Oahspe, the Lord's fifth book, chapter 2, verse 15. Learn to prophesy by the sun. In brackets, I put solar sunspot cycles. And that's it for today's podcast video. Thank you for tuning in, listening, and watching. And stay tuned for another educational studyofOahspe.com podcast video.